Mike. Mike Schweisel is a senior project engineer with EEI, and he's actually been on several construction projects as part of them out in the field during that phase 3 construction phase of the project, and has a lot of good insight from his time out in the field. And we thought that you would enjoy what he has to say and appreciate that. So with that, Mike.
Thank you, Jeff. Everyone hear me okay? So as Jeff mentioned, my name is Mike Schweistal, and I have the pleasure of talking with you about lead service line design and construction today. So get into our agenda for today. We'll get into some policy decisions, public outreach, talk about home assessments, temporary construction easements, design processes, detailed design.
Sorry, Mike's a foot taller than me.
Is that better?
I think it's gonna be.
All right, I'll start over for this. So we'll get into policy decisions, public outreach, talk about home assessments, temporary construction easements, talk about the design process and 2 different methods for a detailed design or unit price contracts. Talk about some things that happen prior to construction, during construction, water meter relocations, get into the methods of construction a little bit, and then talk about what happens post-construction. If we have any time left, we'll get into some questions. So policy decisions are going to be pretty important to decide on early and upfront. Getting your elected officials involved as much as they want to be is going to be pretty critical to answering these questions, such as who's going to pay for the private side development or replacement. And your answer is going to depend on the funding source as well. So you may, if you're using an IEPA loan with principal forgiveness, you're going to be paying for the entire service replacement. If you're using local funds, you may elect to have the municipality pay for it, or the homeowner might pay for it, or it might be a shared cost. And you might also want to look into incentives to encourage participation. Another question that's going to come up that's going to need to be answered early on is restoration of private property. How's that going to be handled? One option is to have the contractor take care of all of the restorations, from the structural repairs to the aesthetic repairs. But that's going to lead up to higher costs because they're going to have several different types of homes with different flooring materials and different wall materials. And it's going to lead to different material costs that end up being unknowns to them when they're bidding. Another option is to put that responsibility on the homeowner and possibly give them a reimbursement for that work related to restoring those aesthetic elements. But at a minimum, the contractor needs to restore the structural elements, the foundation repairs, and the slab repairs. And the same considerations need to be taken into effect when you're talking about the restoration outside of the home as well. Public outreach is another critical step in getting the public to be involved in understanding what's going on for these lead service replacement projects. One tool in the belt for this is to hand out flyers. Flyers are a great way to target specific areas that may have lead services that you can inform them. And depending on your demographic, you may want to hand out flyers in both English and Spanish. Some examples of flyers that we've handed out before are notifications for community meetings, project information, information about home assessments, temporary construction easement documents, flushing guidelines. And then going into the public meeting side a little bit, it's a great opportunity to get the residents involved again. And before the design process is completed, if you can have a meeting, that's a great opportunity to gather resident contact information, to explain to them the importance of removing the lead, why it's dangerous, why there's a risk involved, and also explain to them and assuring them that the water they're drinking, the source water, does not contain lead. It's also a good idea to talk about home assessments and how those will be handled, as well as temporary construction easements. And then if you can get another meeting in before the construction starts with the contractor that's been selected for the work, that's another great opportunity to have your residents go ahead and meet the contractor that's going to be working inside their homes and talk to them about the scope of work and what's actually the process is going to be for replacement, and what the expectations are for the project, and then answer any questions that the residents are likely to have. So home assessments, you may gather these are going to be pretty important information to obtain for design and for construction. Hopefully with the inventory process, a lot of this data can start to be gathered early on, but there's still going to be things that need to be obtained during design. And as you can probably imagine, scheduling home assessments could be up to hundreds of homes, depending on how many lead services you have to replace, can be quite a challenge. You may need to be flexible with when you allow the home assessments to take place, to work around people's work schedules and other things like that. So that might mean evening home assessments or weekend work just to get all of them in. It's also a good idea to use a team of 2 when you do these home assessments, ideally 1 municipal employee and someone from the design team. It helps to have a municipal employee there so that they can kind of be the face for the municipality while the other person from the design team is gathering information. It's also a great opportunity to take detailed notes and gather information that's going to be useful for design as well as construction. And also identify if there is a potential for asbestos. A lot of these homes, they're old enough to have lead services, so they're probably old enough to have asbestos as well. And if you can identify the potential for asbestos in the homes early, you can figure out a plan for how you want to tackle that approach, whether that's more testing to help narrow down the number or just go ahead and try to abate them all. Pictures and videos, everyone knows pictures say 1,000 words. So as many pictures and videos as you can get of inside the home is going to be invaluable when it comes to design and for construction and bidding. And then take sketches and detailed notes of what you find inside. There's going to be, maybe 100 homes, and there's going to be a couple in there that are kind of out of the ordinary. So there may be some information that you can gather from these home assessments that are going to be useful to the contractor. Temporary construction easements. Since we're going to be on private property, we're going to need an easement to be able to perform the work. And these easements need to be signed by the municipality and the property owner. A lot of these homes may be rental properties, so it's important to get the owner of the property involved early on with this as well. And then whether or not you want to record the documents is going to depend on the community and what their needs are. But it's important to also establish what the coverage of the easement is going to be, as well as when it's going to expire. One example could be that it's going to cover the entire lot for the duration of the construction and expires when the meter has been installed. If there's any incentives that you want to use to encourage participation, they'll be spelled out in the temporary construction easement. And then the responsibilities of both parties. You might want to have the homeowner either be present or have an adult present during construction just for liability reasons. So that'll be spelled out here as well. So diving into the design process a little bit more, there's a couple ways to really tackle a lead service line replacement project. One of those is being a detailed design approach, and the other is using a unit price contract. Tim kind of talked about these differences a little bit without mentioning them specifically, but a detailed design is really, the goal is to get as much upfront information as you can so that you can put together a complete set of plans and specs and allow the contractor to put together the best possible unit prices, trying to eliminate unknowns. So some information you may need to gather is, as part of the inventory process, you'll be gathering water service materials. So if you are keeping up with that, you'll be able to identify which ones do actually have lead or which ones of the unknowns maybe don't have lead. You may also want to have some sanitary sewer televised, either to confirm the location of laterals for sanitary services, or either to compare with post-construction televising after the work's been done to make sure nothing's been damaged. Also want to look at trees that may need to be removed for the project. And this is a chance to look at the asbestos testing results and help narrow down that number of potential homes with asbestos. And then you're going to want to generate your geotechnical and CCDD requirements, and maybe develop any site-specific details that you might need for the project. It's also important to note that because this work may take place in other agencies right away, you may need to obtain permits, and you'll have to play by their rules and provide whatever specs or details or plans that they require as well. Comparatively, a unit price contract is going to be a little bit different. And these work generally better when you have a large number of lead services to replace, where upfront home assessments may not be as feasible. And for this type of project, you're going to want to establish all your pay items, establish a contract value, and then replace as many lead service lines as you can up until you get to that. And because there's not going to be as much upfront detailed work, you're going to need to utilize as much information as you have available already. Utilizing information you've gathered from your inventory process could be pretty vital for this and may help save costs in the long run, as Tim might have mentioned. But also utilizing existing plans from subdivisions that you have, or utility maps and atlases, design Julie maps, and institutional knowledge is going to be critical to putting together bidding documents. And the home assessments take a little bit of a different form during this type of contract, because the work for the home assessment is going to be done during construction, usually by the contractor and maybe with a team of someone from the municipality and the engineering team. But regardless, you're still going to need to have any of your geotechnical and CCDD documents done up front. Here's a little bit of a comparison between the two. The time for design for a detailed design is obviously going to be a little bit longer compared to the unit price contract, and the design engineering costs will be a little higher as well. But comparatively, on the unit price contract, the construction engineering costs are going to be higher, as well as the construction unit prices, just because there's going to be a lot more unknowns that the contractor is going to need to figure out in the field. So when there's unknowns, their prices tend to go up. Construction change orders for a detailed design are going to be less likely, again, because you're eliminating unknowns up front. But for a unit price contract, they're a little bit more likely. And then for the number of services you replace in a detailed design, you're going to know exactly how many services you replace. But in a unit price contract, since you're working up to that total contract value, the number of services replaced may be unknown. And you may need to determine what that cutoff is going to be and how you determine which homes don't get replaced, at least a part of this project. So with the design out of the way, the only thing that's really left is to actually replace the lead service. Well, there's still a few things that need to be done before you start digging in the ground. One of those things is to determine who's going to be responsible for the coordination process with the residents during construction. Ideally, this is done during the design phase, and it could be either the responsibility of the contractor or the engineer or the municipality. And this is going to include scheduling things like a site visit, initial site visit, especially with a unit price contract, and also a time to perform the work and any asbestos abatement, or get a time in there to move a water heater. Things like that need to be coordinated ahead of time. For private utility locates, since we are working on private property, a Julie locate is not going to be enough. You may run into sanitary sewer services, water lines in a slab, or HVAC ducts in a slab that are all utilities that won't be located from a Julie locate, and that the contractor is going to have to figure out where they are prior to construction so that they can avoid them. And you also have to complete the asbestos abatement before you really get in there and start the work on the replacement. Due to the nature of the work, if there is asbestos in the home that's in the area that we're going to be working in, it's going to have to be removed and abated properly. Asbestos is commonly found in the flooring materials. So if you have a slab or the water service comes in through the floor, you're going to be drilling through or cutting through those flooring materials to get the service replaced. So abatement's necessary. The limits of the abatement can vary, but typically a 2 foot by 2 foot area is going to be enough room for most construction techniques. And this work needs to be done by a qualified contractor who's qualified in abatement as well as disposal of the asbestos materials. So now with that out of the way, we can get into construction. When we're replacing these services, there's going to be several different types of foundations that we come across. A lot of those are going to be basements or crawl spaces. They're both kind of handled similarly. Some of the challenges involved with basements, you're going to have different foundation material walls. Some of the walls are going to be made of concrete, some of them CFU, some of them are going to be stone. And the good news is that all of these materials can be directionally drilled through to replace a service, but you may want to have some special considerations for particularly fragile foundations that you encounter. Another obstacle is going to be basements that are either finished or partially finished. You see in the photo in the bottom right here, we have a finished basement with a hole cut out for access to the meter. And it's obviously not very accessible, but that's what they had, and we had to work around it. So the service was replaced in the exact same location, so we ended up having to cut into the drywall in order to replace it, and there could be other obstacles in the way as well. Homes that are built on a slab have their own challenges as well. The water service is most likely going to come through the floor, whereas in a basement, it can come in through the wall or the floor. Difference with the slab is it can really come in through the floor and anywhere in the house. If you're lucky, it'll come in through into a utility closet somewhere out of the way, but we've seen water services come in through the floor in the living rooms and the kitchens and the bedroom closets, hallway closets, kind of everywhere. So as you can imagine, limited working area is going to be another obstacle that the contractor has to overcome. And then you are going to be cutting a hole through the floor in order to replace the service. There's really no other way to do it. So you are going to be removing flooring. It could be multiple layers of flooring if the homeowner has done some additional work on the house. And that's another obstacle that's going to need to be overcome by the contractor, and they may need to get creative to tackle some of these. Water meter relocation is another topic that's going to be pretty important to have a good idea of what you want to do going into it. Why might you want to relocate a water meter? Well, for one, ease of construction. You also want to consider maintenance in the future. And then owner preference is not a very high priority, but it's also something to consider to make them happy. And then you also may need to relocate a meter to maintain separation requirements from sewers. So in this photo here, you can see this is in a basement. We have a water meter that comes in through the floor, and it's in a cabinet underneath the sink. So ease of construction, it's not very easy to work in there. It's also not very easy for maintenance in the future if they have to replace the meter or anything like that. It's a little bit challenging to work in that situation, as well as, the owner doesn't have access to the cabinet. So right now, what we decided for this one, we identified a location in the basement that came off the front wall of the house that had easy access to the internal plumbing and tied in the meter there. So it was kind of one of those rare win-win-win situations. So how can services be replaced? What are the methods of construction that you might use when doing a replacement project? One option available to you is open cutting. Some benefits of this are that it takes less specialized equipment. There's more contractors that have the equipment to do this work and that are familiar with doing this work. It also allows for the relocation of the water service if you are trying to maintain separation requirements. Downside to open cutting is, well, it causes more disturbance. So you're going to have more restoration costs, and you may have more trees to remove, and you may have fences or retaining walls that you need to get through. And it's not applicable in all cases. If you have a house with a slab and the water service comes in the middle of the room or middle of the house, open cut's really not going to be an option. So another option is to directionally drill the water service. The benefits of this, it also allows you to relocate the water service. But a benefit over open cutting is that it's generally is going to disturb less, and you really only need to dig at the water main for the tap, at the B box, and maybe at the house. It's going to be applicable in most cases, still not all. None of these really work for every situation, but generally directional drilling is going to be applicable in most situations. Another benefit to it is that you can drill through a foundation wall. So if you have a house with a porch in the front, you want to come into that front wall, you can't really open cut it, but you might be able to drill through it. Some of the downsides with directional drilling are that it does take specialized equipment. So there's going to be less contractors available to bid on your job that have the equipment and experience. And it's also dependent on your soil conditions. If you have soil that's not conducive to directional drilling, it's going to either drive up the price and make the project more difficult, or it may not be feasible at all. Another downside is that during cold weather, since they are using water for their drill rig, they're either going to need to find some creative way to keep the water from freezing, or you might need to have a winter shutdown. Another option available is to use lead extraction. This option is pretty interesting because it actually takes the entire lead service out of the ground and replaces it in the exact same location with the new material. It may or may not require specialized equipment. You can see in the photo on the bottom left there that there's an attachment for an excavator that's basically a big winch that can be used to pull the lead service out and then follow that with the new service. Or on the photo on the right, you can just attach it to an excavator potentially and give it a pull. So just like directional drilling, it does create less of a disturbance than open cutting. Again, you only need to excavate at the main and at the B box and potentially at the home. But one of the downsides is that it does not allow for the relocation of the water service. Because you're putting it back in the exact same location, if you do have separation requirements that you need to meet, this may not be a viable option. And it also requires a fairly straight existing lead service. If your lead service has too many bends in it, or if there's a coil of material underneath the house, you're probably not going to be able to extract it. So we got all the lead out to the ground, new service is in, we're done, right? Well, almost. You still have some follow-up and some finishing items to take care of. One of those might be inspections. Each of these inspections is going to depend on the community, what they require, and it's a good idea to get in touch with other departments to figure out what they're going to require as far as maybe they want a plumbing inspector to look at the tap in the main, the B box and the meter connection. You might require electrical inspections of the grounding rod that was installed, or if the grounding to the water service was relocated. There may be other inspections as well. It's all going to depend on the community. Another important item to take care of before the service is handed back over to the resident is to make sure it's flush per AWWA guidelines. Since we are going to be doing work on the water service, any lead that's existing is potential to be shaken loose and enter their lines. So flushing is pretty important. And then abandonment and restoration. Inside the house, you're going to abandon the lead service as much of it's left by either cutting it at the wall or underneath the foundation if it's a slab. But also at the main, you need to remove the corp stop. And this can be done pretty simply. And just put a repair sleeve over where the existing corp stop was if you're not replacing the main. And then at a minimum, like I mentioned earlier, structural repairs to the foundation are going to be required by the contractor. Whether that's patching a foundation basement wall or the slab, at a minimum, those need to be done. And then any other repairs that are maybe aesthetic that were determined earlier that are going to be on the contractor also need to be completed. And then you go out to the outside of the home and you have the landscaping complete. So now we're done, right? Yes. Unless you have any other questions, that's it.